Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Gooler Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am delighted to introduce my guest today, Deborah Farone. Deborah has had the unique opportunity to play a role in developing the best practices in professional services marketing by working with the most respected and most demanding professionals in the world. Her advisory practice focuses on helping law firms and legal departments with their strategic planning, operations, marketing strategy, training and development, as well as moderating and speaking at retreats and workshops. She is the author of the best-selling legal marketing book, Best Practices, Marketing and Business Development for Law Firms, a book based on more than 60 interviews with leading law firm leaders and marketers, general counsel, and innovators in the profession. Her recent book, Breaking Ground, How Successful Women Partners Build Thriving Practices, has already received rave reviews. She is the former CMO of two international law firms, Debevoise Plimpton and Cravath, Swaine Moore. Please join me in welcoming Deborah Farone. Welcome, Deborah.
Tammy, it's so nice to be here with you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us from your home office in the metropolitan New York area. So, as you know, Deborah, on Work from the Inside Out, we love to begin at your formative years and how they may have informed where you are today. Tell us a little bit about those early years.
I believe I was always fascinated with marketing, and it wasn't necessarily marketing for lawyers, which is the strange subset of marketing that I have now worked in for many years, but I adored thinking about how products were sold and how media was used, and would go to the drugstore with my dad, who would show me the difference between the ingredients in a bottle of Seabreeze, an astringent, and the difference between that and what Clinique was selling. And he would explain to me that the price was part of the marketing. And I think having a dad who was involved in business really did help me understand where marketing came into things. And I was always the kid that, when I worked, I would love doing the window displays at the store, and I loved helping with PR for my small daytime jobs that I had after school. And so I knew I really wanted advertising or PR. I just didn't know which and what I would apply it to. And then, like you, I went to Boston University.
Right.
And it was a wonderful school, and the College of Communications was terrific. And I was involved in something called Ad Lab, which was a student-run ad agency, and really started thinking about marketing much more seriously. That for a first job, I wanted to be either at a PR agency or an ad agency. And after looking at lists of agencies, this was before anyone had any databases, but I created my own little database. I had index cards with the names of each agency that I would apply to. And on the back, I had the names of the people I was speaking to or sending notes to. And I really kept track of every call that I made, every email. It was before email, every mail that I sent.
Yeah.
But I ended up with my first job at Ketchum Public Relations when all of my friends were backpacking through Europe as a graduation gift. I had started work on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, and that was the beginning of it.
Wow. I love that you created your own database with index cards and how methodically you went about exploring your first job opportunities. That's kind of music to a coach's ears. Because I think there are a lot of young people who are getting ready to graduate from school, and they don't think about how to go about figuring out what their options are in that way. That was groundbreaking, Deborah.
I do believe now looking back that if you are anxious about something, one of the best cures is to do something about it, to
Uh-huh.
actually be active about it. And so
Yeah.
instead of being worried about finding my first job, I thought, I'm going to be methodical. I'm going to contact each company that I'm interested in, and I'm going to pursue them. And in
Yeah.
fact, after Ketchum didn't hire me right away. In fact, I received 2 rejection letters from them. It was the 3rd mailing that I did where I included a press kit about myself with a poster and a press release and some other creative things to show that I was really very interested in going the extra mile. And I got a call from their head of HR who said to me, "We don't usually receive things like this, but the fact that you're so assertive and creative, we think maybe you could get a job working for us in our new business department." And so that was really the beginning of it. So I think
Wow.
persistence pays off.
That is a fantastic story. That's amazing. You really did persist. That was your third try and you got their attention. That's great. So you moved from Boston to New York and you had your first job there. Was it everything you hoped it would be?
In many ways, it was. It was very exciting. I loved working on different accounts. I was working with some really wonderfully creative, smart people, both at the firm, and our vendors were wonderful. But it was tough. I had a
Yeah.
very tough boss who was
Mm,
very demanding
mm,
and would throw lots of projects at me. And I learned the hard way how to juggle priorities
mm.
and how to also take breaks every few hours and walk around the perimeter of the building so that I could catch my breath and think clearly. So
Wow.
it was a great experience that way. And we represented everything from Hershey's Foods to Citibank
Mm.
to a law firm. And I kept
Ah.
on thinking, this law firm thing is really interesting. They're now allowed to market. There just been a law passed, a court decision actually, that came down that said lawyers could advertise and market. And I thought maybe this could be something I would enjoy. So I
Oh,
kept that in the back of my mind.
well, that's interesting. So you had exposure to a number of different industries and businesses. You kept that in the back of your mind. How long were you at Ketchum?
I was there for about 3 years
Uh-huh.
and loved it because for a first job to work in an agency, you get to know so many people and you get exposed to so many different things that it's just a wonderful experience. You might not realize it when you're going through it because you're pressured to go on different accounts when you're the low person on the totem pole, and I certainly was.
Yeah.
But you have great experiences and you get to meet clients and get to have a better idea of really where you want to focus.
Yeah. So at that 3-year mark or in anticipation of that, what propelled you to make a change at that point?
I really thought out of all of my clients, I liked the ones that were professional services. I
Mhm.
loved the law firm. I liked the fact we had an insurance company. I liked the fact we had a bank client. And I
Mhm.
thought that would be really interesting to work for a professional service firm.
Mm.
And I had always stayed in touch with the recruiters. And one day a recruiter called me and said, "Would you be interested in going in house and working at a management consulting firm?" And I thought, this sounds really hard, but yes, I'll do it.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up interviewing and getting a job at what's now Towers Watson.
Mhm.
And it was at the time a mix of a reinsurance company, a compensation company, and a general management company. And it was a great way to learn. I loved working with the consultants. I had a great manager who taught me how to write by sending me to NYU and signing me up for a writing class so that I could become a stronger writer.
Wow.
So it was a great job to have.
Yeah. And yeah, what how wonderful to be supported in that way and have so many learning opportunities. And so you were in a supportive role in
I
that firm.
was.
Yeah.
I was. We had 32 offices around the world. And so we had a centralized structure. New York really did everything for all these different offices.
Hmm.
And my boss oversaw all the PR, and I oversaw the branch offices. So it meant getting to know the people in San Francisco or in London or in Paris and helping them with their own PR. And it was a great experience. Basically, my boss's boss, the head of the department, was the one who said to me after I wrote something for her, she said, I think you can be better. And I think writing is going to be key to your career. If you're in communications, it's vital to be able to know how to do this. And so she signed me up for a class through NYU with a
Hmm.
professor, an adjunct who she knew. She sent him a note saying, make sure Deborah becomes an excellent writer. And he really did. He was incredible at editing me, showing me why he was making the edits, telling me to keep them on my bulletin board so that I wouldn't make them a second time. He
Wow.
really helped me. When I look back and think about writing books, it really was a formative step for that person to come into my life and say, you have to be better at this.
I love hearing about somebody like your boss's boss taking that kind of interest in you and then directly connecting you with this professor and having that kind of guidance in such a specific and positive way like that. And it sounded like you were up for anything. You were soaking it all in, it sounds like. You were ready to learn and grow and develop. And I can only imagine it just sounds like it was a great opportunity.
And I think it was, and I don't believe in having great luck in jobs. I think that so much of luck is what you create for yourself by being open and being friendly and letting people know when you need help and being authentic. And that's come up in my later work that the more authentic you can be in a work environment by letting people know who you are and letting
Mhm.
people know what you want to get better at, those things can only help you in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key to building client relationships and getting ahead in a corporation. I think letting people in on who you are is just very important.
I agree totally, completely. And I think sometimes people are so guarded with sharing who they are, sharing not just what they know, but also what they don't know as part of who they are. And there's this fear factor in there. They're afraid. And when they do share it, I think it does pay off, like you were saying. So you had this great writing, it sounds like almost a mentor in some ways at NYU, and you were at the consulting firm. Where did you go from there? How long were you there?
I was at the consulting firm for about 2 years because a
Mhm.
week after I joined them, they announced that they were relocating their headquarters to Westchester. And
Mm.
I was young and single and felt that I really wanted to be in the city. I didn't want to reverse commute. And I remember saying to my boss, unless if you guys are going to give me a golden retriever and a family and a house in the suburbs, I don't think I'm going to be able to make this move. But I stayed with them for 2 years until they did make the move, and in the meantime, been teaching at NYU at night because I've always loved keeping busy, and I really wanted to learn what it was like to teach a class, so I was doing that as well.
What were you teaching?
Marketing and public relations for professional services. It was a passion, and I felt that I really wanted to continue to learn, and teaching was a skill that I didn't know if I had.
Wow.
So that was a great experience, but in the meantime, I got a call from a recruiter that Debevoise and Plimpton was looking for their first marketing person, and I thought, "I could do this." So I interviewed, and they had never really done marketing before. They didn't really know exactly what it was because firms were still so new at this. I started doing public relations and helping with new business pitches, and eventually built a department, became their chief marketing officer. I had a department that did business development research and PR and communications and writing. And it was a great experience and a wonderful firm led by some really terrific partners.
Wow. How big a firm was it?
At the time, I think we had 500 lawyers
Wow.
and quite a few offices around the world, but it was small enough so that you really did get to know the partners.
Mm-hmm.
And my boss at the time, who hired me, Bill Madison, really took me under his wing and would share with me firm strategy, what they were doing, and involve me on partner discussions and at partner lunches and things like that. And so I really think I learned so many good management lessons from him that hopefully I took back to my department and to following jobs that I had.
Yeah. Wow. I agree with you that you create your own luck. And there's an element here, too, that I'm hearing. There was this way in which you showed up curious and engaged and ready to go at every turn. And there you were, 5, 6 years out of school, and you're teaching at NYU. You're doing all these things. You're still in your 20s, right?
Yeah. I think I get bored easily. I think that was it. And I loved having these various projects, and I really do being busy. I do not do well when I'm bored. I had a lot of different things cooking at once.
Yeah, but I think also there must have been a way in which you were also presenting yourself or showing up in a way that I'm guessing other people in their 20s were not, that you were able to, that people were hiring you to do these things. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think I'm a curious person. I want to know how businesses operate. I've always been very curious about that. And so you do ask people questions, or I would ask the head of the firm, how did you get these long-term clients? And he would explain to me that over years they've become friends and they hire him,
Yeah.
or that they've heard of him from his reputation. And so
Yeah.
you start hearing stories and hearing patterns
Yeah.
and doing research into it. Like with authenticity, I always thought authenticity was very important. And I looked for studies that looked at lawyers, the main group I work with, to see how authenticity was valued. And I could not find any studies for lawyers, but I did find studies on banking. And I write about this in my book that for bankers, especially for private bankers, in order to really get someone to trust you, you have
Yeah.
to be very good at what you do. You have to be empathetic to their problems, and you have to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think authenticity really is key, and having a sense of curiosity is also just a vital part of being a good business person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is great. Because I hear the word authenticity thrown around a lot. And especially with regard to leaders have to be authentic. It can sound very empty. And I like the way you're framing it because I think it gives people something to really step into rather than just try to put on as a costume almost.
Right.
And so it's really helpful the way you're framing that. A Debevoise in Plimpton, were you there for you really built that department there.
I did. I was there for 14 years
Yeah.
and loved it and worked with a number of different leaders of the firm. And then thought, "Well, it's 14 years, maybe I should do something different." And I interviewed at a host of luxury companies, which would have been fascinating, but it wouldn't have really paid the bills, but it would have been fun. And then I ended up getting a call from someone who said, "Do you want to meet the head of Cravath, Swaine Moore?" And I thought Cravath had been known as the most prestigious law firm in the world. And I thought, they're not going to want to market. They're not going to want to market the way I like to market. I don't know if this is going to be a match. I might be too assertive for them. They are just, their phone rings, right? And people hire them.
Mm.
But I met with them. I was very honest with them about what I believed they needed and how to market and the expenses that it would involve. And I gave it to them straight because, quite frankly, I didn't think I'd get the job. And I just had a wonderful, delightful lunch with these two men. But I did tell them really what I thought. And I walked out of lunch and thought, oh, I didn't get that. I'm sure they think I'm too big for my britches, or they just didn't like what I had to say. And I walked for about 5 minutes. I remember I was going to get a watch repaired, and my phone rang, and it was one of the partners. And he said, we really liked you. Will you come back and interview with more people? And I ended up getting the job.
Yeah.
And I was there for 14 years. So the
Oh, wow.
same thing. I think I have a 14-year shelf life.
And I want to point out that there you go. You were completely authentic with them and they wanted you back for more conversations. And now I am curious about your experience in pursuing the other possible avenue. You said
Mhm.
luxury firms or luxury. I'm not sure what you were pursuing after Debevoise and Plimpton, but it sounded like you were thinking about another direction at some point.
I loved the idea of marketing things that were aspirational. Debevoise was at the top of the food chain as far as law firms are considered, and
Mhm.
Cravath definitely was too.
Yeah.
I thought there's an interest that I have in how someone grows that prestige and what
Mhm.
components there are that go into it. And so I thought this could be interesting. And I, through friends of mine, including former chief marketing like Bergdorf Goodman and some
Yeah.
people at Brioni, whatever, I ended up getting interviews, and I interviewed at Hermes, which would have
Mm.
been a wonderful job, but I don't speak French. And,
Okay.
but I had a great interview there. And I interviewed at Watch Company. I think it was the company that owned Mercier,
Mhm.
to be, I don't know, a very senior officer there. And I thought these could be great jobs. But in the meantime, Cravath came calling, and
I
I
see.
thought, you know what? This makes sense. This fits with the ecosystem I've been working with. And I know this kind of business. And
Mhm.
it just seemed like a natural.
And so it was it more of the same or was it different than Debevoise and Plimpton?
In many ways, it was different. The marketing was more, I want to say, targeted, in the sense that it was almost like the platinum American Express card commercials that used to say membership has its privileges,
Yeah.
that once someone was a client, they were treated like the gold standard, and they would be invited to wonderful events. And obviously, the legal services that the firm provided were incredible. Just they were impeccable, and those lawyers were so well trained. So we weren't marketing to the world. We
Uh,
were really concentrating on growing the practice from within. So there was a different strategy, some
yeah.
of which I can't go into, but
No, I
it,
understand.
yeah, but it was very different.
Oh,
And learned that law firms can be different one
yeah.
from another, even
Yeah.
within that category.
Yeah. So that's great. So you really did have a different experience. And then you hit that when I hear the 14 years, I'm thinking, don't they say something about a 7-year itch
Right,
or something?
right.
I'm thinking,
You're s
so you took
you're
you
supposed to
14 years to get the itch or something. But
you're supposed to get the 7-year itch, but I'm a slow learner, so it takes me
you weren't
14
you
years.
weren't you weren't bored yet. That's all.
I
Um,
wasn't.
and at the 14-year mark, you decided it was time to do something else.
Yes,
And what did that look like?
I had been approached by a publisher, the Practicing Law Institute, to write a book or to edit a book on legal marketing, and I thought, "This could be great. I can speak with lots of different lawyers at different kinds of firms and really learn what life is like at smaller firms,
Mhm.
mid-sized firms outside of New York and Europe, and this is, I think, going to be my next chapter, not to
Yeah.
use a pun. And in the meantime, I received calls from other firms who wanted me to consult, and I couldn't when I was at Cravath, but I thought, I'll also consult and I'll see what happens. And when I left Cravath, because people don't leave Cravath very often, although lateral partners move around a lot more now than they used to, there was an article in the American Lawyer the next day about Deborah Farone's leaving Cravath. And with that article came other PR, and I ended up getting calls from law firms who said, can you help us set up a marketing department? Or we need help positioning, or we need a strategic plan. So the business grew at the same time I was writing my first book.
Wow. So it sounds like there's this organic flow to your career.
There is. It takes a lot of networking, right? A
Yeah.
lot of staying in touch with people, doing favors for people, meeting with people who need jobs.
Yeah.
And I don't do it because I'm Machiavellian, but I believe you have to be part of the ecosystem. You can't be up there in an ivory tower
Right.
and not know what's going on. Any chance I get to talk to someone who's young and relatively new in marketing, I want to hear what they're doing. I want to learn. I want to find out what social media they're using or
Yeah.
how they're using ChatGPT or Claude.
Yeah. That's really helpful to hear. I think oftentimes when people have had some bad luck, and there's been way too much of that lately with being laid off and the instability of the job market, I can see where people would hear your story. And I'm glad you brought it up. It's a lot of work. It wasn't just, I put on my ice skates and skated from one thing to the next. You have to develop the trust and the relationships to be able to get from one place to the other and to stay in each place that you stayed. Right?
And it's difficult when there's a transition, when you have a head of a firm who you really are close with, who you get along very well, you're at pace with them, you know each other's rhythm. And then all of a sudden you get a new chair. That happened to me several times at both Debevoise and
Ah,
Cravath. But also, I think part of it is how you frame it
yeah.
so that, and you're probably much better at discussing this as a coach than I am, but I think when I found out Towers Watson was moving and I was going to be either out of a job in 2 years or I'd have to do a reverse commute to Westchester, I could have been devastated and I could have just
Right.
been so upset. And I could have either left my job out of anger or
Yeah.
done whatever, taken another job that I didn't like. But I think it's how you handle those upsets that help you grow. I thought I'm going to be methodical about how I'm going to look for a job,
Yeah.
and my next job will be even better than this.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I'll provide as much value as I can to Towers Watson because they're my employer. So let me be a star here, but figure out what I'm doing. So I think some of it is how you put it into a mindset and handle the challenge.
Yeah. Absolutely. You sound just like something a coach would say. So you're very coach like.
Thank you. And I work with only about 8 people a year that I'll coach individually and only on business development.
And yet, what you were just saying, though, is true in terms of we all face ups and downs and things that happen that are out of our control. How do we walk through them and show up at our best? Because that's the best that we can do for ourselves to do that. So that makes perfect sense in terms of how you're going to go forward. It's all part of that authenticity. It's all part of staying on top of what you're trying to do professionally and how you're going to get to the next place. If you were to stomp off and have a tantrum, it's not going to reflect too well on you. Even though it's tempting at times, it's not really the way to go. So I'm curious, you've written 2 books. It sounds like you started to write as you were leaving Cravath, Swaine Moore, or were you
Right.
still there?
No, as I was leaving, I was signing contract and started setting up interviews so that as soon as I left, I had this job of writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was delayed a bit because of client work, but
Oh, okay.
that was my first book, and that was about 8 years ago, 7 years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
2019.
yeah,
Mhm.
and then the latest book I wrote really to help people with individual tips and tactics about how to grow their practices, and in particular, women,
Yeah.
because I kept on hearing from women that they didn't feel they had enough as far as role models, and they didn't know how to develop business,
Mhm.
and they weren't being trained necessarily on how to do it. And so my thought was with this book, let me talk to the superstars, the women who are generating big books of business or who lead law firms and find out from them how did they do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished that. I interviewed 60 women, but I also interviewed some men, some professors, and some other people. And so far, the book has been really very well received. A
Yeah.
bunch of law firms have been buying it in bulk, so I've no complaints.
And I would imagine that some of the lessons learned and some of the stories in that book could also apply to women leaders in other types of businesses and industries as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my friends who I asked to read the book before it was published is in real estate.
Hmm.
And she said, "Wow, you talk all about the art of building relationships. This really could have a whole different title to it. It doesn't have to be just for lawyers."
Yeah.
And it's really true. I
Yeah.
think it's just my sample set were
Yeah.
women lawyers,
Yeah.
and it was lawyers at law firms, but I just spoke at a large insurance company to their people as well. So I think it really is transferable. It's
Yeah.
about business development. It's about creating relationships with longevity
Hmm.
that are honest, that grow over the years.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of good lessons in there about building trust and authenticity.
Wow. And so today you have two books out, one that just came out. You are speaking, you're training, you're coaching. Is there anything else that we missed along the way? I know there's no grass growing under your feet, but I just want to make sure we didn't miss anything here.
I do have a number of law firm consulting clients, and for them, it's helping them with their marketing or helping them restructure their marketing department so they're highly functional, or
Hmm.
I help them with business development programs where I'll help either draft a program or work with them directly on how they're going to get business. So it's a really wonderful practice for me because I took the time to think about what I love doing
Yeah.
and what's there a market for and trying to figure out where those 2 things overlap.
Wow. That's fantastic. I think there's an assumption that all lawyers are great business people and they make tons of money. And I think what you're doing is very helpful. And I'm not saying that they're not, but some lawyers do extremely well financially. But then there's lawyers who are practicing actively, but their income is modest. And so I think what you're looking at here is helping them to both promote what they do, but also build a business.
And even if they are at a firm where they're earning a quite a big deal of money, it doesn't necessarily mean they're happy with their practice.
Mm.
And so my feeling, and I write about this in the book, is that they need to develop a niche. They need to figure out what kinds of clients they want, and they need to pursue those. And so I go through that process as well. So there are a number of reasons lawyers might want to change the way they are doing business rather than waiting for the phone to ring or waiting for a partner at their firm to ask them for help on a matter. I think it's important to think about what is it that you love to do and what kinds of clients do you want, and then to pursue those.
Well, that's music to my ears, of course. And I love hearing that. And I love hearing that you're helping people with that. So if people listening to this want to learn more about what you're doing or want to get in touch, what would be the best way for them to do that, Deborah?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. And my LinkedIn handle is Deborah Brightman. There's a LinkedIn profile out there that's a Deborah Farone that's not a real person. So it's Deborah Brightman Farone.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm also on Instagram under Deborah Farone Best Practices. And on Instagram, I give a lot of the tips directly from the book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's also something worth looking at.
Great. And I know that you have a website as well. So we will have all of that in the show notes. And I know I'm going to be running over to Instagram to look at some of your tips. So, in wrapping up, a lot of people listening to this are curious about how to go about taking those next steps, either in their career or in life. I'm curious, what would be a key piece of advice you might give someone who's thinking about what's next for themselves?
I would say think about what work or what experiences that you've ever had that really make you happy?
Mhm.
When was it that you enjoyed going to work? What was the project that made you happy or was fun? What were the kinds of things that you did that you told your friends about because they were so interesting?
Mm.
Think about that and write down what it is that you want from a job that means the most to you and what you value. And don't do it online on the computer. Do it literally by hand because
Mhm.
there is a psychology
Yep.
behind that brain hand connection. But write down these things. And I think that can help bring you some direction.
Yeah, Deborah, thank you so much for being here. This was exciting to hear about your journey. And thank you for the great advice. This was wonderful.
Tammy, it was wonderful to meet you, and I love your book and your work, so I got to meet someone I greatly admire.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Deborah Farone. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you're interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoolerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 296. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Did you know that ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts can help this podcast reach more people? Please help me to inspire more people to move their careers in meaningful directions by clicking on the Apple Podcasts button. Leave an honest rating and brief review. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles and design a career that fulfills you. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.